The pulpits in our Reformed churches can sometimes feel like politically contested spaces. Maybe that shouldn't surprise us as heirs of the Reformation. And yet, in the year 2025, every pastor I know has stories, their own or those of colleagues, stories about being called out during coffee hour because you quoted Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, or being confronted by an angry church member who is ready to leave the church because you didn't make a particular national news headline the central focus of your sermon on that Sunday. It's exhausting. It's demoralizing and confusing and angry-making. Many pastors I know live with their shoulders hunched up in their ears, just ready to jump at the slightest critique. Some have even tapped out for a season. When it comes to preaching, our most honest confession might be that despite Paul's injunction to the church in Galatia, we are weary in doing good. And if we're really honest, maybe we don't even know what the good is some of the time. The good news is Jesus, obviously. But the other good news is that the Neo-Kuyperian Reformed tradition actually offers deep political, biblical, theological teaching, postures and practices that can help us move through this ever-increasing reactionary polarization toward a principled and responsive posture that's able to navigate the realities of an increasingly pluralistic public square and to better understand our roles as citizens in it. So, utilizing the gifts of the Neo-Kuyperian tradition, the Center for Public Justice is launching Preaching Reformed Fellowship, which will be an 18-month peer learning cohort that will guide program fellows to reflect on and develop their many different roles. First and foremost, our role as Christians. Over and against all of the calls to identify ourselves as liberal or conservative, progressive, traditional, welcoming, confessional, affirming. What does it mean to say we are who God says we are in the waters of baptism? And how can we live as though what God has said is now and will forever be true? Firmly anchored in our identity as God's own children, holy and dearly loved, we turn to our role as pastors, asking, how are we going to manage our anxiety? What are we going to do with the frenzied temptations embedded in our economic, social, political, media landscape? Can we find our way toward a steady, non-anxious, non-reactive, curious, and creative posture? And out of that, can we create a place for God's people to worship and find wisdom to match their fast-paced lives? And then, how do we, along with our congregations, engage our role as citizens in a political community? As followers of Christ's kingdom, what does it look like to live as a good neighbor? How can we bring the light of Christ's kingdom through our presence, advocating for local issues and standing alongside those who are marginalized? How can we support flourishing institutions that seek the common good? What are the rights and responsibilities that come along with all of the varied spheres of our influence? And then finally, we turn to the pulpit, wondering how it is that what we say, and maybe more to the point, how we say it. How do our sermons shape and form the whole of life, the political, social, economic, the whole of life, imaginations of God's people? Recognizing that the best sermon you've ever preached is probably not in itself going to change the world. Is it still possible that a steady, faithful witness in the pulpit, a steady, faithful witness grounded in the hope of the ascended King, can transform the social, physical, economic, neighborly, and yes, therefore political lives of God's people. What would sermons like that sound like? What would it feel like to deliver them to God's people? What could sermons like that, by the Spirit's power, still do to move God's people? To form this world into the shape of the kingdom that is both here and is yet still coming? What would it take for politically contested pulpits to become again what they are intended to be? Lively, vibrant, creative places where God's word and God's people intersect just for this one brief moment in time. And yet daring to believe that in this encounter, the Spirit's work among us can transform the whole of our lives, including our political imaginations. Friends, colleagues, I invite you to consider joining the Preaching Reformed Fellowship, or just finding out more so that we can begin to answer these questions together.